Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Iceberg podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Iceberg or anywhere you get your podcast from. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Dog Daddy Nick Horwat, as you can see on YouTube right now as he is trying to quell his pooches, but we'll get right along with the rundown for the day. First and foremost, we're going to take a look at a few of the more realistic options remaining on the board for the Pittsburgh Penguins at the left wing side, because it still feels like that is the one glaring missing piece for them, is to find somebody to play alongside Sidney Crosby. So we'll talk about three options that are more realistic to come in and play alongside Sid on the top line. Speaking of Sidney Crosby, we'll talk about his placement on ESPN's top 100 athletes of the 21st century. Where did he fall? Did he fall behind any NHL players? And do we think he could have moved up in the list at all? And then we're going to close out the show with a little bit of news and notes, considering the Penguins made a few minor moves over this past week. Let's get started. And let's start with the Penguins' most realistic options on left wing, because when you look at the Penguins roster right now, they have enough players to field a team. Let's not joke about that, because they have players, but they just don't have anybody in-house, at least in my eyes, that it feels like should fit in that role next to Crosby, outside of Drew O'Connor, who we'll talk about here in a couple of minutes. But it feels like they're still looking for that left wing to play alongside Sidney Crosby. I have three options here, but before we get into that, Horwat, do you think there is a chance that the Penguins say, all right, nothing out there fits what we need, nothing out there fits what we're looking for, especially with the team kind of shifting into a rebuild mode? Do you think there's a chance that they go into the season with Drew O'Connor as that top option on the left side?
I really do. I think that might just be where it lands, because a lot of teams are sort of settling into the notion of, this is what we got, these are the players we have, this is the coaching staff we have, this is the front office we have. It is that time of the summer where things have gone quiet. It's definitely in full swing. It's definitely the dog days of summer, if you will. And the moves, at least for now, at least for the rest of July and into August, for most of August, there's not going to be much. There will be a smattering of small things here and there. Maybe the big names that are left on the free agent board find a home, but it'll be for like a year at cheap money at this point. The negotiation rights are pretty much gone. There's not going to be much left. So I'd say that it's very likely the Penguins go into this upcoming season with Drew O'Connor up there, just because everything else has sort of come to a halt. Everything else has sort of stopped. It's just that time. And they like what they have there with Drew O'Connor. They enjoyed what they saw at the end of the season. And if they believe that that can only improve, I mean, it's not the end of the world for them if that's what they have to start with. But also just the options are running dry, and the options that are left maybe won't work out. Maybe don't fit the Penguins mold, because also at this point of the summer, you're not usually looking for your top line guys. You're not looking for the top line left winger. I know the Erik Karlsson thing was a bit of an exception last year, but I think that was just dragging on. It was, everyone knew he wanted to leave. Everyone knew he needed to leave. It was just a matter of waiting for the right deal to come around from either, I think it was Pittsburgh or Carolina. I think it's what the other team in there was. So there was an exception to the rule last year. I don't see there being an exception this year, because there's no big names like that requested a major trade, and it's almost all set in stone at this point.
Yeah, we've talked about a few names that could potentially be on the market. Obviously, you led off this summer talking about the Mitch Marner stuff. That has died down considerably. Who knows where that's going to go? We've talked about the Patrik Laine situation. That's still a domino that has to fall. Obviously, I've brought up Trevor Zegras, as well as Nikolai Ehlers and Rektor McGroarty and that combo package. And while, yeah, some of those would be good moves if the Penguins made them, certainly good additions to the Pittsburgh Penguins, they kind of fall outside of the realm of reality, right? You look at what the Penguins have right now, what they're looking to do. Some of those moves are just going to be too expensive. Some of those moves are taking a risk on a player that you just don't know what they're going to give you, i.e. a Patrik Laine. So what we're doing here is bringing up three names, and don't get me wrong, two of the three names are slightly underwhelming, but that's what's left on the free agent market at this time of the year, as you alluded to, saying, typically teams aren't looking for a first line left wing at this stage of the summer. But to answer the question that I asked you initially, yeah, I think there's a chance that if they don't find the right move, Kyle Dubas isn't just going to bring in a guy to bring in a guy, because they do have Drew O'Connor. And while he isn't, a first line left wing on every team, he was a first line left wing on the Penguins last year, and he held his own. And if you go into the season with that, that's not the worst thing in the world. You mentioned it was likely in your eyes. I think that they're going to make a move, just because I do think there are moves out there to be made for Kyle Dubas. And I do think that he has obviously had something cooking over the last couple of weeks when there hasn't been really any other moves made. So with that, let's get into the 2 free agents and 1 trade target that I have as the 3 realistic options for the Penguins remaining in free agency and the trade market this summer. Now, the Penguins, according to Puckpedia, have $3.5 million in salary cap space. You can really round that up to $4.4 million, because Puckpedia still has Matt Nieto on the active roster, and he is expected to start the year on long-term injured reserve, which would open up his $900,000 in salary cap space. So realistically, $4.4 million, which is more than enough to sign one of these 2 players. Let's start on the free agent market, and then we'll talk about the trade piece that we've mentioned before, but a piece that I think is starting to emerge as the top option and the most likely option for the Penguins this offseason. But let's start with the free agents. First and foremost, 34-year-old Mike Hoffman. He is a guy that has seemingly been in the National Hockey League for ages at this point. Had 10 goals, 23 points last season on the floundering San Jose Sharks team. 20 plus goals in 6 straight years from 2014 to 2024 or to 2020, excuse me. And then the last handful of seasons, he's been under that 20 goal mark, but over the 10 goal mark. What do you think about Mike Hoffman potentially being a Band-Aid for the Penguins at the top of the roster?
If he was able to certainly and for sure find that old rhythm that he once had of being a regular 20 goal scorer with Ottawa, and then capping out at 36 in his first year at Florida. Don't remember him playing in Florida. Oh, I do remember him playing in Florida now.
Yeah.
You would have to make sure it's a certainty that he's going to hit that again, and it's really not. I mean, the way he's sort of, it looks like it bounced around the NHL a little bit since leaving Ottawa, and since he was a big piece of that 2017 run to the Eastern Conference Final. He doesn't have the same juice, the same gumption that he used to bring to a lineup. I think the time has just sort of passed on him. I bet he finds a deal somewhere, just not necessarily in Pittsburgh, and could be his last, considering his age and just, you don't want to say rapid decline in production, but he did drop off 11 points from 23 to 24.
Yeah, and part of that's going to be you're playing with the San Jose Sharks. I mean, but at the same time,
he was playing with Montreal the year before, though. So, and that wasn't a good Montreal team at all.
Yeah, I was going to say, at the same time, he's 34 years old, and there is decline expected, especially when you're not talking about guys like Crosby and Malkin, who are an entirely different conversation when talking about their aging process, as when you're talking about depth guys like Mike Hoffman. I mean, if you're looking at what his ideal role is next year, is a third liner for a decent team that's going to be able to surround him with solid pieces to get the best out of him.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily what the Penguins are, but when you're looking at the free agent market, go to Puckpedia, hit free agents, hit UFAs, and hit left wing. There's 14 names on that list, and I'm fairly certain 3 of them have retired. So you're literally looking at the bottom of the barrel in free agency here. But when you're looking at those names, Mike Hoffman has been a proven commodity in this league before. You can kind of count on him for certain things, and when you place him next to Sidney Crosby, you can potentially hope that he has a little bit of juice left to give for half a season, 3/4 of a season, and hope somebody is able to step up and take his place.
You'd think. And, you say that, it was San Jose. It was one of those teams. The issue with that argument, and it's while I kind of see part of it, the issue with that argument still is someone has to score on those teams. San Jose was a bad team the year before, and what did Erik Karlsson do? He put up 100 points. Why? Because someone has to do it. Why couldn't it be Mike Hoffman last year? Because Mikael Granlund was the one doing it? I mean...
And Anthony Duclair. Don't forget about Duclair. He earned himself a nice deal in New York.
He did. That just kind of shows that even with there being scoring to take, like scoring up for grabs from that team. Again, I get that the Sharks didn't have the puck a whole lot and weren't really putting up much offense anyway. I mean, yeah, Mikael Granlund took the scoring, but he had what, like 50 points, I think it was.
I think he might have broke 60, but it's still
good for him if he did, really. But it just, oh my, there's so much red when you go to their hockey reference page. They won 19 games that last year, by the way. So maybe there's something to be said about, there isn't like that whole team didn't score. Mikael Granlund did cap out at 60.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike Hoffman's still 7th in scoring on that team with 23 points. But it just doesn't strike me as, because everyone's a year older, because the production has already been declining for him even before that San Jose Sharks season. Just not the right fit, especially because his role is going to be different if he signs somewhere else.
Yeah. And again, this is most realistic, and we're talking on July 23rd. Free agency, most realistic. It's not a really great place to be if you're still trying to fill that same role. Other free agent that I see out there that might fit what the Penguins have going on right now, James Van Riemsdyk. He's a year older, 35 years old, 11 goals, 38 points in Boston last season, kind of the inverse of Mike Hoffman, where he still has those counting stats. 38 points is not bad for a bottom six guy. He's always been a big body, good net front presence. He's never scored under 10 goals in a season, even back to his rookie year. So this is a guy that has filled the net historically throughout his career. Again, if you're bringing him in, you would hope he'd be in a bottom six role, but with what the Penguins have going on right now, could you see them bringing in JVR to be that top line left winger to start the season?
Now, I like this one a lot more.
Yeah.
He's definitely a bit more of a proven commodity, and the decline is definitely a lot slower. I don't know how much I would feel about this one because it's so middle of the road, I'd say. Like, it is a give or take option. I don't think I'd hate it if they got him. I don't think I'd hate it if they didn't swing for him. Because of, like you said, he's never had under 10 goals, which is solid enough. I think finding new life in Boston almost helped him out. I'm actually still surprised he's a free agent, even with the age. I get there's a lot declining about him, but it's not it wasn't super noticeable last year. I mean, maybe just being on Boston helped cover that. I think overall this would be a better choice than Hoffman, but again, I'm still kind of on the fence about it. It's something about, I know, I get we don't want to discuss age and bring that into it, but I mean, when Kyle Dubas himself said they're trying to make the team younger, and yet they have no choice but to enter another season as the oldest team in the league, he's going to try and cut wires and cut age somewhere. And if he can do that by bringing in somebody younger rather than, what'd you just say, 35 already?
Yeah.
And he would, I mean, it'd be a 1-year deal. I was going to say he'd need that 35 plus deal. That's not going to make too much of a difference when it's just 1 year. But that it also just doesn't sit fully right with me. So I'd be a bit more on the fence about it. Overall, I'd say if this was 5 years ago, fire away.
Yeah, of course. If he was only 30 years old, JVR in the net front would be good for the Penguins power play. But I think the problem that you're alluding to there and kind of dancing around but not smacking right on the forehead is these are the options they have left available to them if they can't make a trade. And as we saw last year, Kyle Dubas mentioned he tried to trade Jake Gensel a little earlier. He tried to find a dance partner for Jake Gensel a little bit earlier, or he said he just tried to find a trade partner to shake up the locker room. It didn't happen. People weren't making trades last year in the NHL up until the end of January. I remember it was a long drought and everybody's like, well, nobody's really doing anything. If Kyle Dubas can't make a trade, these are the options he has left. And you can mention, oh, yeah, but you have Daniel Sprung. Yeah, but you have Dominic Kubalik. Yeah, but you have Denis Gurianov. And I looked at all those names, but at the same time, these are all guys that have been, at their best, inconsistent at the National Hockey League. These two guys, Hoffman and Van Riemsdyk, at least throughout their career, even though they're a bit older, have shown to be able to be consistent in what they are and proven commodities for what they are. And putting that next to Crosby is a little bit more of a sure thing than Denis Gurianov, who, lit the world on fire in 2020 and 2021. And it was a name that I certainly had interest in back then, but you look at the last 2 seasons, he's just fallen off a cliff. And maybe he needs a fresh start, and Pittsburgh's the perfect place for it. But you're taking a risk, especially whenever you have, a lot of young guys that you're hoping get opportunities this year, bringing in somebody that, has a very unlikely chance of refining his game as somebody like a Gurianov who didn't prove it over time. I think that's why he falls lower on the list than guys like Hoffman and Van Riemsdyk, even though they're at the age of 34 and 35. But like you mentioned, it's not the best case scenario to go out and get one of these two, Hoffman or Van Riemsdyk. It's the fallback options if you can't perform a trade. Now, again, we talked in trades about it'd be great if they got Ehlers and McGroarty because that's a great young piece in McGroarty, and Ehlers is a phenomenal piece for the next 2 years. It's going to cost a lot of money, which takes it a little bit further away from reality. The one name that I've started to fall in love with the last couple of weeks, looking at his situation in Toronto, Nicholas Robertson. I mean, 22 years old, requested a trade earlier this month. He had 27 points in 56 games last season for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and he's currently a restricted free agent. It feels like this is probably their best case scenario for filling that top line left wing with a young, talented piece that can not just be part of the team next year, but can be part of the future of this team moving forward.
Yeah, he could be. It's the young piece. It's a good addition to the future of the Penguins if they were to pull something like this off. Kyle Dubas is worried about and focusing on building out that future, building out the prospect pool, building out this team with young faces that can be NHL ready soon or later. And Nicholas Robertson, that's a guy NHL ready now. For how he's, I don't want to say disrespected in Toronto, but for the way that he's kind of been pushed down the depth chart on multiple occasions, I'm shocked he played 56 games last year. Mm-hmm. Now the production doesn't shock me. I think 14 goals, 13 assists for the full 27 is for his situation overachieving almost. Like I said, I'm shocked he played 56 games. So seeing that he got 27 points in that time, usually playing, I believe, depth roles, that's solid. Let's see what kind of production he could put up in a top 6 situation, maybe playing alongside Sidney Crosby if deals like that was to get pulled off. Mm-hmm. And made it this far in and not even mentioned the old Kyle Dubas connection. Like there's probably some previous eyes already on Nick Robertson from Kyle Dubas' time there, and also
Jason Spezza, Wes
Clark. And I was thinking of Wes Clark, just that's the big one that I believe I would love to know who was in charge of the draft in 2019 for the Leafs. Mm-hmm. Was Wes Clark involved in that? Like, so now that Wes Clark is moved over to the Penguins, does that connection amplify? Mm-hmm. It's things to I'll have to look into that one because that adds a huge layer if that is something that the Penguins are looking to do. Mm-hmm. I don't know who could go the other way. I don't know who the Leafs would have interest in because the Penguins aren't going to want to pull from their prospects. The Penguins aren't going to want to pull from their draft picks. And the Leafs are usually tight up against the cap, so I'm assuming they are again right now. It would just depend on who they'd be willing to take because, I mean, they're not going to take a Ryan Graves off our hands. They're not going to take, maybe a Rickard Rakell, but the money change there is too big. So there'd have to be some sort of, it would have to be a wild deal that is too big brain for me and you to even think of right now.
Here's the thing. I think it's a draft capital trade because the Penguins have acquired some extra draft capital over the next couple of years. Toronto, by the way, has $2.5 million roughly dollars in cap space right now, but this is a team that is looking at Nick Robertson, and he's looking back at them and saying, I don't want to be here. Like, trade me. So there's a little bit of, that leverage that gets taken away from Toronto because everybody's like, well, either trade him or not, but he doesn't want to be there. Like, you can try to mend that fence, but clearly he doesn't want to be there. And if you're the Pittsburgh Penguins, I started this whole thing off saying he's 22 years old. If you trade next year's second round pick for Nick Robertson, all of a sudden you're saying, all right, next year's second round pick is 22 or 23-year-old Nick Robertson. You'll take that. Like, I will take that in exchange. The question becomes, like, once they start asking, all right, well, is he worth a first round pick? No, he's not. He's 22 years old. He has a lot of upside, but this is a guy that, wants out of your organization. I'm not giving you a first round pick for him. He's a restricted free agent too, so you don't have to worry about really the contract going either way because he's definitely going to come in and under that 4.4 that the Penguins have left in their salary cap space. So it just feels like going into August, where last offseason, August was the Erik Karlsson trade. This is clearly nowhere near that, but that feels like outside of the Crosby extension, which we'll talk about in a couple minutes here, that feels like the best possible scenario for the Penguins is they acquire Nick Robertson, they infuse that youth immediately into their top six, and they bring him in and get him a fresh start next to Sidney Crosby.
And that'd be a huge boost to his pedigree. Who knows what kind of future he has. I mean, I think when he came around, I believe there was a lot of hype around him. I don't want to say being a better player than his brother. That's at this point, that's going to be a hard mountain to climb. But having that comparable, because the relation's there, so there's automatically going to be that sort of where you're going to be compared to your brother probably forever, just the way it is. I mean, look at the Nylanders. I mean, Alex, he's a good player, but can't really hold a candle to what William's been able to do over the course of his career so far. So maybe there's something to unlock that. Maybe Nick Robertson can find something that is more toward what his brother has done with Dallas. Again, I'm not saying he's going to reach that height, that level, but give him the opportunity to prove that he is his brother and has the same sort of mentality, has the same sort of gene pool. There's something that could be had there, and it is again, nothing against Drew O'Connor, but an improvement offensively, no doubt.
Yeah, and here, this is not a apples to apples comparison, but Nick Robertson's 22 years old. Even if you trade, draft picks for him, guess who came into the league at 22 years old? Jake Gensel. It's been a pretty good 8 years since Gensel joined the league at 22. So you're adding a Nick Robertson. That's what you have. That's the potential you have is not a 40-goal scorer in Jake Gensel, but a potential top six guy for the next decade. Because if the Penguins were in a better situation, Gensel would have been re-signed. The Penguins weren't in a good situation. They traded Gensel. They're trying to get back to that type of situation. A guy like Nick Robertson could certainly help them get there. So I think when looking at trade prospects and trade possibilities, to me right now, the top of the list is Nick Robertson. And then there's a conversation to be had. You could potentially put Line A at second, because what's the asking price going to be for a player that, again, is unlikely to go back to the team that he's currently on, but he still has that $8.7 million salary cap hit. So it's probably Line A, and then you got to get into the Zegrises and the Ehlers, where there's going to be a large payday for the team that trades him, whether it be the Ducks or the Jets, because they are going to command so much in return for the services of these young players that are really good. Young in Zegras' case, Ehlers is more towards the back half of his career, but again, still a player that is extremely, extremely talented and very, very valuable to the Winnipeg Jets.
That's a tough one to pull off, because you start thinking of when it comes to those big ones, what trade pieces do the Penguins have? And each of those teams you mentioned, because on the Penguins trade pieces, I know I said Raquel, but that's also kind of unlikely. Ryan Graves is extremely unlikely unless you're dealing with a team willing to take on cap for the year. Then it goes down to Tristan Jarry, essentially. Yeah. And those teams, I mean, they're not taking a goalie.
No.
The Jets are not going to take on a goalie. They're good with Hellebuck, the reigning Vezina winner, and whoever they put in backup for under $1 million, because they have the reigning Vezina winner. They're not going to take on Jarry at multiple years at multiple millions of dollars. The Ducks could use a goalie. The issue is they don't need two starters. They're not the kind of team that needs a 1A, 1B situation, and they'd be trying to send Gibson the other way, and the Penguins don't need that.
No. So
that trade just wouldn't work out. Again, with those two teams, maybe there is a trade possible that doesn't involve goaltenders, but it seems unlikely. And at this point, again, we're this close to August. What team is looking for a starting goalie still? None, basically. I think there was a team last year that still was. I can't remember exactly. This isn't last year, though. At this point, everyone has their starter, or at least an idea of who their starter is going to be. Jeremy Swayman does still need to be signed, but that'll happen. That's it though. Everyone has their starter pretty well set, and they're looking forward to their goaltending tandems this year.
Yeah, so it's going to be obviously, I would say, a more interesting August than we typically see. But last year, Dubas, August, Carlson for all our bad players, that was crazy. It's not going to happen again. So you mentioned the top players the Penguins might want to trade. It's not going to be in any of these. Hey, you take our bad players, we'll take your good player, and we'll call it a day. That's just, it was as you mentioned, it was a perfect storm last year for the Erik Karlsson stuff on August 6th, I believe, and then August 7th, obviously, Sidney Crosby's birthday. So a lot of interesting things still to come this offseason, including Sidney Crosby. Sidney Crosby was named a top 100 player, or athlete, I should say, of the century by ESPN. Now, ESPN, surprisingly, threw 3 hockey players in this list. Number 98, they ranked Connor McDavid, which, fair enough. McDavid has only been around since 2015 in the National Hockey League. It was professional athletes, so you got to take out World Juniors when he was in it. You got to take out the Erie Otters and the CHL when he was in it. So I get it. It's of the century. It's the previous 24 years of existence of professional sports. He's only been part of it for 9. So number 98, Connor McDavid comes in there. Number 54, Alex Ovechkin. And then number 22, Sidney Crosby. Doesn't crack the top 20, but does crack the top 25. And this is what they had to say about Sidney Crosby in that article. Quote, Crosby's teammate Chris Letang recalled how in Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final against the San Jose Sharks, Crosby vowed that he and Letang would team up on the, quote, biggest goal of the night. They wound up connecting for a game winner that secured Pittsburgh's 4th cup in franchise history. Letang was understandably stunned by Crosby's fortune-telling prowess, on such a large stage. But Crosby impresses in similar moments throughout his career. So Sidney Crosby, obviously a nice little anecdote there from ESPN, but Sidney Crosby ranking 22nd best athlete of the 21st century. Did you think that was fair? And did you think he could have been moved up this list at all?
I think all 3 of them could have been moved up this list. I get McDavid has only been around for 9 years. That's still a long time. And you've seen what he's done, especially in the last 4 or 5 specifically. 98's far, far, far too low for Connor McDavid. It just is. Especially when you look at some of the players and athletes directly in front of him. Mm-hmm. Like, what's Chris Paul doing? Was it Chris Paul? I think it was. What's he doing on this list at all?
Yeah.
I mean, no offense to Chris Paul, great basketball player, but what are you doing here at all? Especially considering some of the names that really were on here. And as for the Crosby anecdote, before I continue my rants, I forget if it was that series or the Tampa Bay series. There was one where they were setting up for an overtime. They were setting up for a face-off in overtime. Crosby just pointed at the ice and said, Connor Shearer, you go right there. I'm getting the puck to you on this face-off. You're going to shoot it.
It was that series. It was game 2 against San Jose.
I remember watching Crosby just put his stick down, pointing, go there. You be there. And then he won the face-off. Connor Shearer scored. And the look of, did you just wizard that? So Crosby's got a knack for that. Oh, and he should also be higher. I mean, maybe not too much because, again, it's ESPN and they shaft hockey all the time. So I understand why there's only 3 and why they're all kind of not properly rated. But I'm not going to get too much on a soapbox about it. It's almost expected that Crosby was the top hockey player, though, because of that longevity. And I think that longevity is what would put him in over McDavid in the situations because he's been around since 2005. He has got 3 championships. We're not taking gold medals into this, but
no, we are. We are. Well, I mean, look.
You said professional, so not World Junior stuff. Yeah, so
professional.
So a couple gold medals, World Cup of Hockey, if you really want to count that, and then a World Championship for Team Canada in the World Championships. It was deserving to see him up at the top there, and Ovechkin chasing down a scoring record. I mean,
should be higher than 50th.
Yeah, looking to break one of the quote-unquote unbreakable records in the sports. Yeah. That is enough in itself to really push him up there, especially since he could do it this season.
Yeah.
This season. Think of that. And he still has years left to add.
Yeah.
I think I have a name that they definitely missed out on that is a little less expected, but I also want to just say I'm not shocked that ESPN did it like this.
Yeah, no, I'm not either. And you could tell, you said, I don't know if they're including Olympics. They included Olympics
Yeah.
heavily in
I
their
should have thought of that
decision-making.
because Olympians were
Yeah,
all over this thing.
look at their top 10. I mean, Kobe Bryant at number 10, Usain Bolt at number 9, Tiger Woods at number 8, which is an entirely different discussion for an entirely different day.
Mhm.
Simone Biles at number 7, Federer at 6, Brady at 5, LeBron at 4, Messi at 3, Serena Williams at 2, and then, clearly they're taking Olympics into account here. Michael Phelps, the top athlete of the 21st century. So, yeah, they're including that, which is why I think you saw Crosby so much higher than Alex Ovechkin, despite the fact that everybody else puts them neck and neck in everything else. But
Yeah.
it was interesting because they started releasing it 25 at a time, starting from 100 to 75, and kept going. And I kept scrolling. I was like, I know Crosby's like, as soon as I saw McDavid at 98, I
Oh my God,
expected
yeah.
Crosby to be lower, similar to like where Ovechkin was. But 22nd from ESPN, that feels like a little more respect than I could have expected.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know where a lot of respect would have been had, because you got to hear me out on this, because he's played in the NHL started before 2000 and up until I think it was the 2017-18 season or something like that. Jaromir Jagr was not on this list.
Yeah.
He played for 18 of those years in the NHL, but the Czech league is still a professional league.
Yeah, but they weren't looking at Czech hockey. I'm surprised they looked at North American hockey for this list.
Then you don't need to count the Czech league in it. Fine. How about those 18 years he played in the NHL at the age of plus 30, plus 40, and still produced, was still an all-star, and also carried the pedigree from his 90s days, which played like the entire decade there too.
Yeah.
I was, to be honest, whenever I was scrolling through the list, I was expecting to see Jagr pop up because of, maybe they would mention, and he's still playing professionally and has been since at the age of 50, whatever, because that's a huge deal. Yeah. They do this in the 90s or 80s, whenever it was. Gordie Howe would have made the list. Easy.
Mm-hmm.
He's playing in his 50s. He is. And why? Because he has the pedigree to carry it over. Jagr has the pedigree to carry his over and is still playing professionally. Also just had his jersey retired, had that whole moment. I think you didn't have to put Jagr high. You didn't have to put him in the top 50. You didn't have to put him in the top 60 even, whatever. Just being on the list at all would have shown that ESPN kind of cares, because the way ESPN, I think, is looking at it is, well, we've started caring about hockey again for the last 3 or 4 years. Mm-hmm. Those are the years we're going to look at, not everything in between. Oh, Jagr's still playing. Like, how many people at ESPN know Jagr's still playing? I shouldn't have said that out loud, but it is what it is. I was expecting Jagr to be on there, especially considering 24 has basically been the year of Jagr.
Yeah. Yeah. So. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, Crosby at 22nd. Yeah. I'll take it. I'll take it. There's discussions to be had, especially Tiger Woods at 8. That one's crazy. But, I digress on that point. Before we switch over and just touch on a couple news and notes here to close out the show, any concern about Crosby not having a contract in hand and signed by now?
No, there's no concern in it. However, the longer it goes on, and especially if we get into August, if we pass up his birthday and there's still no contract signed, expect that speculation to come right back. Because really it should have been done already. It should have been. I mean, everyone expected, before free agency opened, everyone expected that July 1st extension to be announced. And then a couple days after, it was, he's just letting Kyle Dubas work on the team, letting him focus on free agency, focus on any deals that need to get done. Okay, fine. That's understandable. He's Crosby. He's here anyway. It's not like he's not under contract. Then nothing came of it. Rob Rossi put out on July 8th, a week after the opening free agency, that a deal is close to being done. Mm-hmm. Something along those lines. Okay,
nearing a new deal, yes.
Nearing a new deal. And then for the next 2 days or so, it was the discussion of, okay, here's his legacy, here's this, that, the other. It has been radio silence ever since. Nothing else has happened. I I'm not, again, like I said, I'm not saying there's anything to worry about, but we were told there's something close, and it's been 2 weeks. It's been a longer gap between being told there's something close than the opening of free agency to that update. So was it close, or what are we doing here? That's why I said I give it until after his birthday before the speculation ramps back up.
Yeah.
If we go into the season and there's nothing signed, I mean, look what Tampa just went through with Stamkos. I'm not comparing this at all because, like I said, there's nothing to worry about. But Tampa was going into the offseason. It'll get signed. He's in his last year. He's the captain. He's going to get signed. Going into camp, I mean, he had that fiery press conference, but there was still no worries. He's going to get signed. He's the captain. He's Tampa Bay. He's going to be here. And the whole season goes by. Still nothing. Are we doing something here? Nope. He's leaving in free agency. All right. So the comparison's going to be there. Just be ready if nothing is signed by August 8th.
Yeah, it's going to get really loud north of the border if he's not signed by the.
I wouldn't be shocked if he did in America too. I really wouldn't if they care. But
we just had that entire conversation. But at the same time, it'll get louder up north than it will down here. But at the same time, it will be a story down here if he's not signed by the opening of training camp. Again, I'm not concerned. I'm a little confused as to what's holding this up. And we might never know the answer to that. But, we obviously went through everything 2 years ago with what the holdup was with Malkin and Letang. And, they don't value me. They don't think I'm good anymore. We saw all of that get thrown into the news. Crosby expectedly taking a different route here very quietly. That's why I think everybody's curious as to, okay, it's July 23rd. You've been eligible for 3 weeks now. The excuses are fading away as to, all right, Kyle Dubas, while there's still work to be done, Kyle Dubas's docket is a lot more clear now than it was 3 weeks ago. You can knock out a deal that is considered to be, if you take all accounts into consideration, considered to be pretty simple, especially if he wants to, if his commitment to Pittsburgh, which was part of Rossi's thing, is this new contract is going to be a show of his commitment to the city of Pittsburgh and hockey in Pittsburgh of itself. If it's that simple, where's it at?
Yep.
Crosby can be at his cottage all he wants. Pat Brisson, this is Pat Brisson's regular season. This is Crosby's offseason, and Pat Brisson's the guy that's negotiating this, not Sidney Crosby. Obviously, you're going to make calls, but Crosby doesn't have to be in a boardroom, doesn't have to be at his desk. So what's holding things up? That's why I'm confused, not concerned.
And it's not like Crosby hasn't been in front of cameras a couple of times this offseason already, speaking about the Four Nations face-off. Hey, so what's going on with the contract? And asked directly about
anything.
And it's not going to, but he's going to say, I'm going to keep it as private as possible. Okay, that's cool. And then, I mean, there was no media, but he was then seen with the Canadian soccer team. I mean, seems to be doing stuff, seems to not be at his cottage. I think, well, there is e-sign these days. I mean,
yeah, it's not like he has to come to Pittsburgh to sign the deal. Although I'm sure Pittsburgh would like to have him in Pittsburgh to sign the deal to make a big PR thing about it. But at the same time, it's Crosby. He's been here for 20 years. I think we expect him to be here for the next 3 to close out his career, or 4, whatever it ends up being. So again, I'm not concerned about it because at the end of the day, whenever somebody asks me, do you think Crosby will finish his career in Pittsburgh? The answer has always been unequivocally yes. I'm a little confused that it's taken this long to get that deal done. But hey, I'm not going to complain because we're going to need something to talk about in August.
Yeah, and I'm not concerned either. I think the concern will grow if training camp opens and there's nothing happening.
Yeah, I don't think it'll get that far.
No, but
again, I didn't think it'd get this far.
Right, but that's when the concern-o-meter will start ticking, is if training camp opens and there's nothing signed yet.
I need to make a graphic that goes in between us. That's the concern-o-meter.
The confusion-o-meter, though, is that thing is skyrocketing. That thing is off the charts because really, if it is, especially considering the rumored deal seems affordable, 3 years, $1 million at most. Dude, knock that out in a day. Come on, what are we doing?
There's no question. And the no movement clause is a prerequisite for this entire conversation.
Of course.
So, again, there's minutia to contracts that we don't always talk about. Maybe that's what they're talking about. Maybe he's trying to negotiate partial ownership. Who knows? Again, jokingly, you cannot negotiate that into an NHL contract. That would be unheard of. Other than Lemieux, but times have changed.
The Crosby memoir of this portion of his career, this couple month portion of his career is going to be nuts, really, because who knows what is going on behind the scenes.
Do you think he's going to release a memoir?
Someone's going to write
Somebody
something.
will write it.
If Rossi's writing the book on Malkin,
on Crosby,
someone's doing the Crosby one.
Someone's doing it. Maybe Brian Metzer. We'll throw that out there.
There you go.
Give it to Mets. We love Mets on this show. Let's close things out with our news and notes. We're not going to dive too deep into it, but want to keep everybody updated on the happenings of the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Pens fill out their AHL coaching staff, hiring Nick Luco and Sheldon Brookbank to flank Kirk McDonald down at the American Hockey League level. Luco was the head coach of the Jacksonville Icemen, also the general manager, I believe, or front office member of the Jacksonville Icemen of the East Coast Hockey League, previously coached under McDonald with the Reading Royals, a team that Luco had played for. So big ECHL presence in Nick Luco and Sheldon Brookbank, of course. I missed that one. That one apparently happened prior, but Brookbank and Luco to join Kirk McDonald at the American Hockey League level. And then the only other thing we got to mention here, Penguins signed Harrison Brunick to his entry-level contract. Brunick was the Penguins' 2024 second-round pick, a right-shot defenseman who had 21 points in 49 games played for the Kamloops Blazers of the WHL last season. So now we look at it, both Penguins second-rounders of 2024 have signed their entry-level contracts. Both will be heading back to the WHL this season, but not before a pit stop at Penguins training camp this fall. Horwat, any thoughts on the news of this past weekend, however small it may have been?
However small it may have been, my only reaction to it really is, and Brayden Yager continues to wait.
That's fine.
Which is fine, yes.
He's going to sign again. It's the same thing as Crosby. He's signing eventually, yes. And it's unlikely he's ever, it's unexpected for him to play at the NHL level this year. So why worry about it? So
you're right. Why worry about it? But also, it's possible he gets that 9-game sample size. So he's going to need a deal to have that. And it's going to be an ELC. We're not worried about term, length, money. It's going to be a walk in the park to sign. It's just a matter of finally giving him that message and that notifying the agent, hey, here's the deal. Pen to paper, please.
Yeah.
Moving on. See you at camp.
And also, I have very little concern about Brayden Yager's love for Pittsburgh based on everything I've read, everything I've heard, and literally every single game he played in Moose Jaw last year wearing the Penguins gear that he was given at training camp last year. The kid has loved his time with the Penguins, said he was super excited to see Tanner Howe, a friend of his, get drafted in the same organization because he loves it here. He's going to sign his ELC eventually. It's just a matter of when and not if. But nice to see that Brunick and Tanner Howe are both now under the umbrella officially signed to the Pittsburgh Penguins. But that is going to do it for this episode of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. We'll have a special guest on Thursday's episode to give Kyle Dubas his grades for this offseason, because at this point, there's only a handful of moves left to give. We'll talk about best move, worst move with a special guest host, including Nick Horwat. He's not going anywhere. So there's going to be 3 of us on Thursday. That's basically all I'm going to say there. But we will see you guys on Thursday. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great week, Pens fans.